In this demo, I'm going to show you how we can set up CI/CD using Visual Studio Team Services. Here I am in Visual Studio Team Services, and I will go to my Git repository where I checked in some of the files that I want in my Docker image. So here you see a Docker file that specifies how to create a Docker image with the from Microsoft IIS. Then you see that I'm going to the inetpub directory, and then I'm adding the index.html file. The index.html file does not contain anything special, just one sentence I can see on the screen. Now when I go to builds, I can add a new build. And here I can select any template I want. There are some Visual Studio templates, some ASP.NET templates, but there's also Xcode, Android development. You can use Jenkins. You can pick any you'd like. We're going to pick the empty template. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to specify the name of the build. So we will select the name custom IIS for Docker and then a CI build. And we're going to specify where our sources will come from. They will come from our Git repo. You can have multiple in VSTS, but you can also select any of the external version control systems that are supported like GitHub or Subversion. Next, we can add different tasks. So we'll search for the Docker tasks. And here you see that I will add first two tasks, one to build an image and one to publish the image to GitHub. So first, I will start with the build an image task. Here I'm going to specify that I want to actually build the image. I'm going to specify which Docker file I'm going to use to create the Docker image. So here you select the Docker file. I'm going to select use the default build context because that's the context the Docker file will run in. So it has the index.html file. And then I'm going to specify the name of the image. I'm going to prefix that with Marcel V because it's the name of my Docker Hub location. So now I will copy this and then I also include the latest tag. I always want to mark it as latest. And then I will select the Docker registry connection. And for this, you need to set up a Docker registry connection using the management tool here. So here I go to Docker registry. I can then specify a connection name, give it the username, password so it can log in. I won't do this in this case because I already set it up and it's called MSFT course. So we can use that in our task. So if I go to the drop down, you'll see MSFT course, and that's the connection to my Docker Hub account. Now the next thing I want to do is push an image. I'm going to push the image using my registry connection. I'm going to specify the exact same name for the image. Then I'm also including a latest tag there. And with this, we're done setting up the build. So I can save this and queue it, but before we do so, I need to specify where I would like to trigger this. I'm going to trigger that with every commit in my repository. And the final thing I need to set is a set of options because I need to set which agent will take care of running this build. And I want to run it on my same machine, which is in the default pool that I have. So now I can save and queue, and it will start the build for me. What happens is you can now see the exact output of the build agent. It is now going to build the image using Docker tools. Then it's pushing the image up to the Docker Hub. And then when it's done, I get a build identifier that I can use later in my release pipeline. So those are the two phases that we discussed. Phase 1, the build. And once we're done, we can then go to the deployment phase. So now what I will do is I will go to releases. And here I can specify a new release template. So here I go to release definition. I can select a template. I will select the empty template. And then I will use my CI build to link to this particular release. I'm going to name this stage verify. I'm going to add a task here. And this is still the old UI. The new UI you can search, but in the old UI you still have to find your Docker tasks. You see there are plenty of tasks that we can use during deployment. I'm just looking here for the Docker task. Here it is. I'm going to add it. And I need to add it a couple of times because I need to first run the image, then stop the image, and then clean up the image. So first we're going to run using the connection I already set up to the Docker Hub. Then I'm going to specify, and I'm going to run an image. Next I need to specify what is the name of the image, which is then of course again prefixed with Marcel V, noting that it's coming from my public registry. Then I'm going to specify the port mappings and of course the name of the container. So the port mappings are 8080 and the name of the container is the name that I can use in the later task to do cleanup. Next is a Docker command that I just want to run. So I'm going to run docker stop with the name of the container. And the final thing is cleaning up the image after the fact. So then I do an rm and then the name of the container again. Now what you normally do is when you run such a verification process, you would like to add some tests. So what you could do, for example, is run a functional test, which is, for example, a Selenium test or just a functional web test to get the data from the running instance. Of course, we need to specify then on which machine are we going to run that, where are the test artifacts. But we're not going to do it this time because otherwise it's hard to demo. What I will do is I will disable the second two steps. So the moment I would run a deployment here, then and I want to run it of course on my local agent, so I will select the default pool for that. The moment I run this, I can then show you that the image is actually running as a container on my machine. So now what I will do is I will create a release. You see, this is the release agent that runs on my machine. It's accepting all kinds of commands, so that's the reason it's going back to my machine. That's what I selected as the agent. Now I can start a release. And before I do so, I will show you that there are no Docker images running at the moment. The next step is that I will start a new release. And then we can follow along and see what happens in the release by clicking this. You can then see the logs. You see then that the artifacts are already downloaded. And then it runs an image. So that was very fast. And now when I do a Docker PS, you will see that the Docker container is running on my local machine. Now I can of course do a Docker inspect here so that I can get the IP address of the Docker container. And now I can then go to the Docker container and see if it's actually serving up my page so that the container image was built the way I expected it. Here you see the text that I expected, so you see that the build was successful and it really deployed my image during a deployment phase. So if I do the Docker PS and then stop, then I can define Setg, which is the name of the container, and then I can remove the container so that I can run the commands again when I would do a release pipeline again. So let's go back to the release pipeline and fix it up a little bit more. And when I go to edit, then what I will do is I will enable both the tasks, because these are the stop commands and the rm commands that I just did manually on my machine, so that we always have a clean state of the machine after we're done. Click OK, and now I can run an additional release. And when we will look at what is going on with the release, we can then look at the logs again over here. And here we see we're downloading, running the image, and running the two Docker commands, and then it's all cleaned up again. So this is a very easy way to run our Docker commands using a deployment agent, and we can now see that it's cleaned up very nicely after the fact. So this is a way to use a continuous delivery and continuous integration pipeline using VSTS, and we will extend that of course to deploy to clusters in the next modules.